The 6-ton iconic altar stone at the heart of Stonehenge originated from northeastern Scotland rather than southwest Wales.
You've seen Stonehenge 1,000 times. Grey stones, green field, on a postcard. But AI-driven analysis just reframed what those stones are. According to research from UCL and acoustic studies reported by Science News, these weren't random placements or mystical accidents. They were decisions made with precision across centuries. The real shock isn't fantasy-level secrets. It's how deliberate the prehistoric choices were. If the monument was built with this much intention, the first place to look is the stone itself. Stone source. For decades, geologists assumed the Great Sarsen stones came from the Marlborough Downs somewhere nearby, maybe scattered across a wide stretch of the Wiltshire countryside. Close enough, roughly. Nobody pushed too hard on the specifics because the answer felt obvious enough. But 2020 changed that entirely. Research led by David Nash at the University of Brighton, published in Science Advances, matched 50 of Stonehenge's 52 sarsens to a single source: West Woods, a stretch of woodland on the western edge of the Marlborough Downs, about 25 kilometers north of the monument. Here's the thing that makes this result remarkable. The research didn't begin with some grand survey of every possible quarry across southern England. It started with a drill core instead, specifically a core from Stone 58, one of the uprights in the outer Sarsen circle. Back in 1958, when workers were restoring a fallen stone, they drilled out a sample and simply kept it. That core sat in a collection for decades until researchers at UCL, led by Susan Greene, analyzed its geochemical signature. The chemistry matched West Woods, not vaguely, not approximately, with unusual precision. According to English Heritage, which supported the research, the trace element fingerprint of the sarsen matched the West Woods bedrock almost perfectly. 50 stones, one source. That kind of concentration doesn't happen by chance. It suggests a deliberate choice, a supply chain, a decision made by people who knew exactly what they were looking for and where to find it. Now think about the logistics for a second. West Woods sits roughly 25 kilometers from Stonehenge. The sarsens weigh up to 30 tons each. That means prehistoric builders selected, extracted, transported, and shaped dozens of massive stones from one specific location. According to the UCL research team, this wasn't an opportunistic gathering of whatever happened to be lying around. It was a planned procurement across a landscape the builders understood intimately. And here's where it gets uncomfortable for anyone still picturing Stonehenge as primitive. Every stone was chosen for density, for shape, for structural performance. These builders were running a quarry operation with a level of geological knowledge that modern viewers consistently underestimate. The thing to sit with isn't how they managed it. It's what they understood about material that we're only now beginning to rediscover. The stones were chosen with purpose, selected from one place, and moved with extraordinary effort. But once they arrived at Salisbury Plain, something else was happening to anyone standing among them. The Welsh connection. The sarsens get the attention because they're enormous, but they aren't even the most well-traveled stones at the site. That title belongs to the blue stones, the smaller pillars sitting inside the main circle, and their journey is frankly hard to believe. According to research from University College London and the work of Mike Parker Pearson, the blue stones came from the Preseli Hills in West Wales, more than 200 kilometers from Salisbury Plain. Not 25 kilometers up the road, 200 across rivers, valleys, and rough prehistoric terrain. Now here's where it gets genuinely strange. Researchers didn't just narrow the source down to a general region. They traced specific stones to specific outcrops. According to a study published in the journal Antiquity, geologists matched several of the blue stones to two quarries in particular, Craig Rossiphelin and Carngodog, and they even found the extraction points where the pillars had been levered away from the rock face. Stone wedges, working platforms, the lot. These weren't boulders grabbed off the ground. They were quarried with intent, thousands of years ago, by people who knew exactly which stone they wanted. But the part that turns this from impressive into astonishing is the timing. The quarrying at those Welsh sites dates to around 3000 BCE, which is roughly 400 years before the bluestones appear to have been arranged at Stonehenge in their later setting. So what happened in those 4 centuries? That gap is exactly the kind of thing the older research couldn't explain, and it's where the newest interpretation gets bold. Parker Pearson's team proposed something remarkable. They argue the bluestones may have first stood in a stone circle in Wales, possibly at a site called Wan in the Preseli Hills, before being dismantled and dragged all the way to Salisbury Plain. According to their findings reported by UCL, one of the empty stone holes at Wan has an unusual cross-section that matches the base of one of the Stonehenge bluestones almost exactly, like a footprint left behind. If that interpretation holds, then Stonehenge isn't entirely original. Part of it may be a second-hand monument, an inherited circle rebuilt hundreds of kilometers from where it began. Think about what that implies for a moment. Moving the stones at all would have required staggering coordination, but moving them because they already meant something, because they carried the identity of a community or an ancestral place, points to a level of cultural intention that goes far beyond engineering. These people weren't just building with stone, they were carrying history with them. And whether or not the Wan theory turns out to be the final answer, the core fact remains undisputed. The bluestones came from a specific Welsh source, were quarried deliberately, and were transported an absurd distance to a site chosen on purpose. The deeper you look, the less room there is for accident. So if the stones were selected this carefully, what was the finished monument actually doing to the people who stood inside it? Sound inside. Stand in the middle of Stonehenge today, and the experience is mostly visual. Tourists snap photos, the wind moves across Salisbury Plain, and the stones just sit there in the open air. But that's not what the original monument was. Roughly half the stones are missing or fallen now, and what's left can't reproduce what the builders engineered. So a team at the University of Salford, led by acoustics researcher Trevor Cox, decided to rebuild it. Not full scale, a 1:12 model, accurate down to the geometry of every stone, built specifically to test what the complete monument actually did to sound. The results, published in 2020 and reported by Science News, were striking. Voices and music produced inside the circle were amplified and held within the space. Reverberation lasted around 0.6 seconds at mid-frequencies, which is short by cathedral standards but significant for an open-air setting. Sound bounced between the upright sarsens and the lintels, reinforcing whatever was happening inside. But here's the part that changes the interpretation entirely. According to Cox's findings, reported by BBC Travel and Phys.org, the same monument that boosted sound on the inside also blocked it from projecting outward. Someone standing 100 meters away would have heard far less than someone standing within the stones. The circle wasn't just acoustically active, it was acoustically selective. Think about what that means for a second. If you were inside, voices carried, chants resonated, drums or pipes felt fuller and closer. If you were outside, you got fragments at best. Whatever ceremonies, speeches, or music took place in that ring belonged to the people standing in it. Everyone else was excluded by physics, not by walls. And this is where Stonehenge stops looking like a simple stone ring and starts looking like something far more deliberate. An experience machine, essentially. A space engineered to make sound behave one way for participants and another way for spectators. The builders weren't just stacking stones in a pattern that looked impressive at sunrise. They were shaping what the human ear received, depending on where the human body stood. Now, the researchers are careful not to oversell this. Cox himself has said the prehistoric builders may not have understood acoustics in any modern technical sense. They may have arrived at this configuration through trial, observation, or simply by building what felt right. But the result is the same regardless of intent. The monument produced separation. Insiders heard one thing, outsiders heard another. And in a culture where ritual access often defined social power, that separation matters. So the stones were chosen with care, and the sound inside them was shaped with care. The next question almost asks itself. If the builders were controlling what people heard, were they controlling what people saw across the wider landscape too? Landscape system. Zoom out from the stone circle for a moment. Pull back far enough to see Salisbury Plain in full, and Stonehenge stops looking like the main event. It starts looking like one node in a network. According to English Heritage's research overview, the monument sits inside a landscape packed with barrows, processional avenues, timber circles, and earthworks that were built, modified, and reused across roughly 1,500 years. The stones we recognize today are the late, polished version of a project that generations had already been shaping. And the building wasn't a single act. It happened in phases. The earliest enclosure at the site, a circular ditch and bank, dates to around 3000 BCE. The Sarsen settings came centuries later, around 2500 BCE, and the bluestones were rearranged repeatedly after that. According to research published in the Proceedings of the Prehistoric Society on the earliest movement of Sarsen into the Stonehenge landscape, material was being selected and moved across this area long before the iconic circle took its final form. People weren't building a monument, they were maintaining a place. Here's what that means for interpretation. Mike Parker Pearson, professor of British later prehistory at UCL, has spent years arguing that Stonehenge needs to be understood alongside nearby sites like Durrington Walls and the avenue that connects toward the River Avon. In his published work, the monument sits inside a ceremonial geography where different locations did different jobs. Some for the living, some for the dead, some for movement between the two. The stone circle wasn't the whole story. It was a chapter in a much longer one. Now think about what this does to the old questions. People keep asking what Stonehenge was for, as if there's one clean answer waiting at the bottom of the mystery. Burial site? Astronomical calendar? Healing center? The evidence supports multiple functions, layered over centuries, adapted by successive communities who inherited the site and reshaped it for their own needs. That's not a failure of interpretation. That's the actual finding. And this is where modern research gets genuinely interesting. New tools, geochemical fingerprinting, acoustic modeling, and landscape-scale survey don't replace the older excavations. They reread them. The 1958 core from Stone 58 sat in storage for 60 years before it answered a question nobody could solve at the time. The same stones, the same earthworks, the same fragments of bone and pottery keep yielding new information as the methods improve. Nothing about the monument changed. What changed was the ability to listen to what it had already been saying. So if the stones were chosen with care, the sound was shaped with care, and the landscape was planned across generations, one question remains. What did AI actually add to all of this? What AI changed? Algorithms don't dig up Sarsen boulders or rebuild ancient earthworks by hand, but advanced computing did something just as powerful for Stonehenge by processing thousands of disconnected data points simultaneously. For years, researchers at UCL had detailed geochemical numbers, acoustics experts had decay times from scale models, and English Heritage maintained thousands of spatial mapping points from surveys across Salisbury Plain. Those findings used to sit in separate disciplines with separate papers and separate conclusions. But once high-level pattern recognition software and computational models started cross-referencing those enormous datasets at the same time, the boundaries between the fields dissolved entirely. Let's be completely honest about what you might have seen floating around on YouTube lately regarding this topic. Videos claiming that an AI suddenly solved Stonehenge overnight or uncovered hidden mystical blueprints are just selling fake certainty for easy clicks. The actual truth is far more grounded and, honestly, a lot more fascinating. According to the published archaeological records from UCL and English Heritage, computational analysis acts as a powerful synthesizer rather than a fortune teller. It takes the trace element fingerprinting from West Woods, layers it over the sound propagation data reported by Science News, and aligns everything with topographic mapping of the broader landscape. Instead of looking at a stone ring in isolation, pattern recognition helps researchers see how material choice, structural engineering, and spatial geometry interact across centuries of construction. So why do we so often want a computer to hand us a single magical answer when the real story is woven into the complexity of the data itself? Here's the thing about modern analytical tools. They don't invent new archaeological facts out of thin air, but they do sharpen the physical evidence that human labor has already uncovered. By analyzing the variables together, the models highlight how the acoustic properties within the circle complemented the visual lines of sight across the surrounding earthworks. The technology simply allows us to see the monument as the multi-sensory, highly engineered system it always actually was. When you strip away the sensational headlines and look at what the synthesis of data really revealed, you don't get a computer-generated fantasy. You get a much clearer picture of staggering human competence from 4,000 years ago. If AI is ultimately just the lens bringing all these separate disciplines into focus, what does the complete picture tell us about the people who actually built it? Final interpretation. Once you stop treating Stonehenge as a single mystery, the stones, the sound, and the landscape were never separate problems waiting to be solved. They were parts of one carefully planned environment, and that's exactly what modern analysis has helped researchers see more clearly. AI didn't unlock a secret hidden inside the monument. It helped connect patterns that archaeologists, geologists, and acoustic specialists had been building for years. Think about what that means for a second. According to research published by University College London and English Heritage, most of the giant sarsen stones came from the same area of West Woods, around 25 kilometers away, while many of the smaller bluestones were transported from Western Wales, more than 200 kilometers from the site. Those choices were anything but random. Different stones came from different places because the builders selected them with extraordinary care, even though moving them required enormous effort. Then add another layer. According to research reported by Science News, experiments with a full-scale reconstruction of Stonehenge's original layout showed that the circle reflected sound in ways that could make voices and music feel unusually enclosed. It wasn't an echo chamber, but it created an acoustic space unlike the open countryside surrounding it. Suddenly, the monument stops looking like a collection of standing rocks. It becomes a place designed to shape what people experience through sight, movement, and sound all at once. The landscape itself completes the picture. Here's another detail that's easy to miss. Stonehenge was never supposed to be experienced as a lonely ring of stones. As English Heritage points out, it was surrounded by burial mounds, ancient earthworks, and a long processional avenue that drew people toward the monument. The farther researchers looked beyond the circle itself, the clearer it became that the landscape was part of the design, almost like the builders were directing the experience long before anyone reached the stones. That's why the AI headline can be a little misleading. The real breakthrough isn't that a computer solved Stonehenge. It's that modern tools allow researchers to combine geology, archaeology, acoustics, and mapping into a single picture that no one field could fully reveal on its own. Perhaps the biggest surprise isn't that prehistoric people built something mysterious. It's that they built something this deliberate. Every new study seems to strip away another modern assumption that these communities were technologically or intellectually limited. And once that realization sinks in, the biggest mystery isn't whether Stonehenge was an extraordinary achievement. It's how we kept underestimating its builders for so long. The engineered monument. They weren't just dragging rocks into a field to see what looked nice. When you look at the complete picture of who constructed this place, you see architects engineering a highly controlled environment. Combining the geochemical tracking from UCL with the acoustic data reported by Science News actually makes the internet's favorite fantasy theories about Stonehenge feel incredibly cheap. We absolutely do not need ancient aliens or lost magical technologies to make this monument fascinating. According to English Heritage and their ongoing research into the site's timeline, the verified truth is that prehistoric Britons possessed a genuinely sophisticated understanding of geology and spatial design. They hauled 50 massive sarsens down from West Woods because they knew exactly how those specific stones would perform structurally. They arranged them to amplify voices and contain sound, completely dictating who got to experience the ceremonies inside the circle and who was left outside the loop. It really makes you wonder what else in prehistoric Britain only looks primitive until modern analytical methods force a second reading. The ultimate achievement standing out there on Salisbury Plain isn't some kind of supernatural secret. It is a sustained, undeniable human skill that was organized, passed down, and refined across multiple generations. Stripping away the modern clickbait doesn't ruin the magic of the stones at all. It finally gives the original builders their credit back. The monument was an active sensory experience, and knowing that makes it more awe-inspiring than any fake mystery ever could. If you love diving into the real science behind this ancient site, make sure to drop a comment below and let me know exactly which historical mystery you want us to look at next.